Hello, my name is Garchomp Pro, and I've been Challenger since Set 2. Today what I'd like to talk about is some of my favorite early game comps to play, as well as in-depth how to play them. So some notes before we begin is that typically upgrades trump all else during Stage 2. You should be playing around the upgrades you hit. Feel free to deviate from the comps I'll talk about in this video if you hit a different assortment of upgrades. This guide is simply just guidelines on some ideal boards to play early game that will make you strong. If you don't have upgrades, play around the items you have and the pairs you have. In general, I like to hold pairs for units that go well with my items. For example, if I have lots of tank items, I'll hold the tank units. And if I have AD items, I'll hold the units for the openers. I'll discuss that use AD carries, and the same for AP items. One other principle that is good to follow is that early game frontline is king. You ideally want to have equal number of frontliners and backliners. However, more frontliners than backliners is fine, whereas the reverse is not. This means that at level 3 we want 2 frontline, 1 backline, at level 4 we want 2 frontline and 2 backline, and at level 5 we want 3 frontline, 2 backline, etc. Of course, it is okay to, let's say, play 3 frontline and 1 backline at level 4, but playing 3 backline and 1 frontline at level 4 would generally be ill-advised. Alright, so first we have the Laser Core Opener. Now the Laser Core Opener is very good with AD items, as it's going to allow us to play the best early AD carries, such as Ashe, Sivir, Kayle, and Vayne very easily, as well as getting a bunch of free damage from the Laser Core drones. We also get to run Renekton, which is one of the best frontline units in the early game. The core of our build is going to be the 30 early Laser Core units, being Renekton, Ashe, and Yasuo. Blitzcrank here can be any brawler, although Blitzcrank is typically the best due to the fact that he's the easiest to 2-star. Tank items can either go on Renekton or Blitzcrank, whichever you hit first, and AD items can go on your Ashe. At level 5 with this board, you can play either Camille or LeBlanc for admin, which is especially good if the admin is scaling HP, that way you can scale it and keep it the whole game. Otherwise, you can take a nice team buffing admin as well. You could also play Duelist at level 5. Vayne 1 is a very strong AD item holder, so if you hit her, she's great to play. Kayle 2 can also hold AD items, although typically I would rather carry my Ashe 2 over a Kayle 2. Or you can play Sivir to buff up your Ashe as well. If you have Riven over Blitzcrank here, at level 5 you can put in Defender as well. At level 6, you're going to want to either play either 2 of Admin, Sivir, or Duelist. So basically just 2 of the ones I just talked about at level 5. Or you can play 4 brawler board like here. At level 6, if you have items on Ashe, you can also consider dropping Yasuo for Sivir to further buff Ashe's damage, as the Laser Core damage during Stage 3 is going to be a bit less impactful than it was during Stage 2. In general though, if you have an Ashe with no Yasuo, Sivir just makes sense to slot in this comp with the same opener to buff her up. Typically I like to put my items on Ashe instead of Sivir, due to the fact that Ashe is a bit easier to 2-star, although Sivir 1 is better than Ashe 1 and Sivir 2 is better than Ashe 2, so keep that in mind. And then at level 7 here, you can just pivot into a Laser Core board or any strong AD comp. This should be able to tempo you into a decent amount of HP with a relatively cheap board to have a good late game. So next we have the Gadgetzan Opener. Now I think the Gadgetzan Opener is one of the strongest openers if you have AP items, as it's going to allow us to hold Annie, who most Spellslinger comps are going to want to play in the late game, and makes it very easiest for us to pivot into a strong 4 Spellslinger board in the mid game. The core of this build here is going to be Poppy, Annie, Lulu for the 3 Gadgetzan, and then I'm also running a Spellslinger backline for extra damage. Here I have Lux, as well as another defender to round out our frontline. I'm running Rell because she gives Star Guardian. If you don't have a Rell, you can run Wukong instead, and if you have Wukong 2 and Rell 1, I would typically just run Wukong over her. Lux can be any Spellslinger, but she's the most consistent to 2-star, which is why I have her in the comp. AP items can go on either Lux or Lulu, whichever you 2-star first. They can go on LeBlanc 1-star if you hit her as well. Sona can also slot in nicely over Lux, as it'll give Spellslinger and Heart, as opposed to just Spellslinger. Tank items will typically go on Poppy, as she's easy to 2-star. Unless you hit Annie 2-star, then you typically want to be putting your tank items on her. At level 4, you would either just play the 2 defenders, Annie Lulu, or simply the 2 defenders, Annie Lux. You want to make sure you have enough frontline at level 4, so I typically wouldn't play Lulu and Lux at level 4. And then at level 6, there's going to be multiple options for what we can play. This board can pivot into a bunch of different types of mid-game boards, and I'm going to give some examples of them. The most simple option is just going to be to add an Ox Force unit over Annie. Let's simply just say Alistar here, and you can just call this your board. You also might want to opt into 4 Spellslingers for the mid-game. In that scenario, you would drop Lulu and play LeBlanc and Sona. Of course, with that board, you're going to be indexing really heavily into Annie, because you're going to be making sure her tankiness is a lot higher due to the fact that her shield scales off of her AP. This you're probably going to prioritize playing Ox Force a lot higher than you would if you weren't playing 4 Spellslinger. So your board then would be the 4 Spellslingers, an Ox Force, and a random 6 slot. That random 6 slot can be either a random upgraded unit or admin. So an example of this board would be right here. We have the 4 Spellslingers along with Ox Force and Blitzcrank for admin. This is the board that I personally typically look for if I'm rolling at level 6 for Spellslingers, as I think it's probably your most consistent and strong board at level 6. If you hit Nilah and Kai'Sa, you can easily pivot into a 4-star Guardian board in the mid-game with either Kai'Sa or Lux as your carry. Here's an example board. If you don't have Poppy upgraded, you can drop her for Fiora to give Ox-Force and Duelist. One other variation of this is to instead run a Heart over Lux. Then at level 6, you have potential to pivot to a 4-heart board that looks like this. So if we go back to our board here at level 5, we can simply run just Pantheon over Lux to give 2 heart. And then we can pivot into a 4-heart board at level 6. This is especially going to be good if you have Cleansing Safeguard. You can play something like this, should be very strong at level 6. You're going to want tank items on either Lee Sin or Pantheon here, with ideally Sona as your carry, although oftentimes you're going to have your carry items on Lulu early game, and you're simply just going to keep her due to the fact that she's 2-starred, and you don't want to sell a 2-star Lulu during stage 3. This board here can pivot into just a strong heart comp, or as the 2 previous boards I showed, the Star Guardian and 4 Spellslinger variations, should be able to pivot very easily into either Twisted Fate or Nico carry late. So next we have the Infiniteam opener. Now Infiniteam 3 and 5 if you manage to get the spat is a very strong early game board. Playing Infiniteam opener is great due to the fact that it can lead to AP comps by carrying Lucian and can lead to AD comps by carrying Sivir. Shen and Pantheon are also 2 of the best early tanks, so they will utilize tank items extremely well. If you get Infiniteam +1, you have the option of staying in Infiniteam, but it is not forced, so you can easily pivot it into anything. I'm going to cover 2 variations here. First when we carry Sivir, and second when we carry Lucian. For now, we're going to assume we have 80 items and want to carry Sivir in the early game, and put tank items on Pantheon or Shen. The 3 core units we'll be playing are Pantheon, Lucian, and Sivir, or Shen if we manage to hit him. If we manage to hit a Shen, the Shen can replace Lucian, or Pantheon, although typically you would prefer to keep Pantheon unless it's 1-star and Lucian is 2-star. Typically, I like to always copy a frontliner. Here we would be copying Pantheon. If the Hex is back row, you have the option of duplicating a 2-star Sivir or Lucian, although make sure that you have a stable frontline first, as frontline is king during stage 2. It's okay to put one of your frontliners on the backline to copy it if you need more frontline. The obvious play here at level 4 is Ashe, however this is somewhat problematic, as you would have a 3-to-1 ratio of backliners to frontliners. So even though she gives us a nice synergy of Sureshot for our Sivir carry, I wouldn't recommend doing it. This can be okay if you have a frontline Hex and Pantheon too, but typically you'd rather be playing any random, preferably upgraded, frontline in addition to this at level 4. Ashe can come in at level 5. If you fail to hit Ashe, at level 5 I like to fit into Defender. The Defender buff will apply to the whole team, and remember we're going to have 6 units on our board due to Infiniteam making a extra unit, making it a better splash than Brawlers who will only buff themselves. It's also viable at level 5 to run +2 random good upgraded units, just make sure at least one of them is a frontliner, or Morgana 1 or Rammus 1 as they're really strong at level 1 on their own. You can slot in Ezreal to give Lucian quick draw, however this isn't optimal if Lucian doesn't have any items, although it's going to be better than a random synergyless unit. Of course, if you get Shen off of Orb, this whole situation is much more obvious. You're just going to play Shen, Sivir, Defender, plus either Pantheon or Lucian at level 4, and slot in whatever you want at level 5. The ideal level 5 board is going to look like so. This is assuming that you hit a Shen. If you have Infiniteam +1, you can opt to play 5 Infiniteam at level 4 or 5, just play the 4 Infiniteams +1. Although make sure you don't get baited into playing a bunch of unupgraded units. You'd rather play upgrades with Infiniteam 3, then 5 Infiniteam with unupgraded units. However, with Infiniteam +1, simply add Lucian at level 6, and you have a super strong 5 Infiniteam board for stage 3, so just take this board, add Lucian, and you're good for stage 3. From there, you can play 5 or 7 Infiniteam and enjoy your free top 4. Of course, if you have no Shen, your level 6 board is just drop Shen and play Lucian and a Defender. So we would drop Shen, we would play Lucian, and then we would just slot in any Defender like Poppy here. With no +1 and a Shen, just slot in any random upgraded or good unit. By level 6, you should have seen at least one Rammus or Morgana, so if we have no Infiniteam +1, we're going to slot in Shen here, and then we can potentially just run like a Morgana for our board like this. If you don't have Infiniteam +1, this comp will be strong enough to save you HP and get you to level 7 or 8 to play a proper AD comp such as Jhin or Samira. One final note is that if you have Ashe 2 and Sivir 1, you'll probably want to itemize Ashe 2 over the Sivir. Now we're going to assume that we have AP items and we'll want to carry Lucian. Again, with tank items on either Shen or Pantheon. Our 3 core units are going to be the same as earlier. Sivir can again be dropped if we high roll a Shen. Similar to the Sivir version, at level 4 we're going to want to play a second frontliner to balance our frontline and backline. At level 5 it's very good to hit an Ezreal for quick draw, or you can slot in 2 Defender if you need more frontline, haven't hit Ezreal, or the lobby is AD heavy. Kai'Sa also works over Ezreal and is especially good if you have Rel for 2-star Guardian. So a potential board we could be playing at level 5 is we slot in Rel right here, and then we throw in Kai'Sa. Of course, instead of Kai'Sa, we could be slotting in Ezreal. We just want to make sure that we have at least one extra frontliner That way, once we're copying Pantheon, we essentially have 3 frontliners, 3 backliners, and things are nice and balanced. Assuming you have no Infiniteam +1, this is going to be your ideal level 6 board. We're just running 3 Quick Draw plus Defender, plus 3 Infiniteam. If you have a Shen, you can play Sivir over the Shen and a random Defender over Kai'Sa or Ezreal, as we're going to want to make sure we have enough frontline. We don't want 4 backliners, 2 frontliners, we want 3 and 3. Quick Draw isn't necessary to run. You can play random upgraded units or Morgana/Rammus over the Quick Draws if you feel you have enough damage, but if we're putting items on Lucian, having more Quick Draw is going to be very beneficial. You can theoretically use Ezreal as the carry on this board. However, if you want to play a different early mid-game carry than Lucian or Ezreal, it realistically makes more sense to just play another opener. Kai'Sa will want to play a more Star Guardian-oriented opener, although she can technically work here as well. So next we have the Anima Squad opener. You're typically going to want to play the Anima Squad opener if you have an angle to play Anima Squad, so either an Anima Squad +1, lots of Anima upgrades, or an Anima Hero augment, such as the Nasus Support augment. You'll typically want to play Anima early to get as many stacks as possible, so that way you can play Anima Squad late game. I'm going to start by assuming that we have no Anima +1, then I'm going to cover the case when we have an Anima Squad +1. One thing to note about this opener though is you ideally want to stack as many Anima stacks as you can, meaning you're going to prefer to run a slightly weaker Anima unit than a non-Anima unit as your carry. This also means that if you're leveling up and you have no good unit to put in, you can always just put in a random Anima unit due to the fact that they're going to not steal your kills. So these 3 here, Sylas, Nasus, Jinx, are typically going to be our core units as they are easy to hit. Naturally at level 4, we can slot in Malphite for this board to give us Mascot. You're typically going to put carry items on Jinx here, AP items are great for her, and AD items are fine as well. Tank items are a little more awkward as you would ideally put them on Sylas or Nasus. However, a lot of the time you'll want to keep them the whole game, and finding one cost at higher levels is pretty difficult. Thus, I'll often prioritize putting tank items on another unit to make the game less awkward for me. This is rectified, of course, if we have a Riven, as you can simply just put tank items on her. At level 5, there's no easy fit for this board. Of course, we can slot in Gnar for Prankster, but you won't always hit him. You can simply play double Jinx if you're worried about other units stealing your Anima kills, though. Otherwise, you can slot in a nice 2-piece like Defender or Admin at level 5, or you can play the aforementioned Malphite plus a random upgraded or good unit, such as a Morgana, Rammus, or Nilah 1, as they're great at 1-star even without traits. At level 6, you're typically going to want to roll for 5 Anima, and here's a sample board. On this board, I would either slot in Nilah to buff Vayne if she has items, or you can play Defender/Brawler, here I have Wukong. At this point, you typically want tank items on Riven, AP items on Jinx, and AD items on Vayne. Now, of course, this opener is much smoother if you have a Riven or a Vayne. If you start with a Riven, you're going to play Riven plus what other 2 Anima units you hit. Riven is typically going to hold your tank items, then you're typically going to play either Defender or Brawler at 4, so for example, Wukong. At 5, you can play both, however, you may have too much frontline in this case, especially if you're running Sylas plus Nasus, then you may prefer to just run 2 random backliners. However, that's not ideal as they'll steal your Anima stacks. However, you can get away with a frontline heavy board like this as Riven and Nasus both do pretty good damage, so having a 4-to-1 frontline to backline ratio here is not that bad. Again, you're going to want to roll at level 6 for the aforementioned 5 Anima board to be strong then, and generate as many Anima stacks as possible level 6 to transition into a nice level 7 Anima board. Now, if you start with Vayne, you're going to have these 3 here as your core units, Vayne, Sylas, Nasus, because those are the easy frontliners to hit. We're of course going to run 80 items on Vayne. At 4, we can slot in Duelist, ideally Nilah, and at 5, we can fit in Malphite for Mascot or another random frontliner. And of course, if we hit a Riven, we can run Defender/Brawler. So here we could just run Malphite, and just any random Duelist, maybe like a Fiora or something. A board like this is ideal at level 5, although somewhat unreasonable to hit. At 6, again, you're typically going to want to roll for 5 Anima, like before. Now we're going to assume we have an Anima +1. Of course, your only core units will be 2 Anima. So for this, I'll be using Nasus and Jinx, although sometimes it'll be Sylas. At level 4, you're typically going to want to run a 2-piece frontline synergy, typically Defender or Brawler. If you don't have Riven or Vayne by 2-3, you can opt to take 1 off Carousel to give you 5 Anima at 2-5. Else just play a random unit at level 5. Again, double Jinx is totally fine as you don't want your random unit to steal kills from your Animas. But of course, if you have Sylas and then either Riven or Vayne, your board at level 5 is just going to be the 5 Anima plus a frontliner, such as a Wukong to give you Defender. Again, with Anima +1, as soon as you have a Riven or Vayne, you typically want to run 5 Anima. So here's a sample board here. Here we just run 4 Anima plus Defender, Brawler, or Mascot. And here's another sample board running Nilah for the Duelist with our Vayne. Again, if you have Vayne, you typically want to be running another Duelist. If you don't have 5 Anima by 3-2, make sure to roll down for it at that point, as you will want the strength to keep getting Anima stacks. A couple other notes about this opener here If you have Prankster, I like to frontline Jinx. She won't get one-shot at this point in the game, and being able to toggle aggro is extremely powerful early game. I typically throw her on the outside of my frontline, so she is targeted first, gains a bunch of mana for a free cast, and then she will escape to your backline and stay safe. This is powerful because you get free mana, and splitting aggro early game allows for your whole team to stay alive longer, as instead of one unit taking 100% of the damage then immediately dying, you're going to have two units take 50% of the damage, and then both of them are alive dealing damage. One other mistake I've personally made is putting Spark on a non-Anima squad unit. I just don't do it. It's going to steal all your kills, and you'll be sad that you won every round stage 2, but only had 10 Anima stacks at Crux. So finally, we have the Duelist opener. 4 and 6 Duelists are very, very strong early game. Duelist is a great tempo comp that can roll heavily on level 6 and push for a win streak, but Duelist can also just be played to tempo into a level 7 or level 8 AD comp. You can theoretically go into Twisted Fate Spellslingers by running something such as a Rageblade Shiv on your early Duelists, but it's more natural to run 80 items early game. So here's the standard level 4 board with tank items on Fiora and 80 items on Kayle. If you hit Nilah or Vayne, they're going to go in. Unit priority is upgrades first. Then I would say the priority is Nilah over Fiora over Yasuo over Gangplank for the melee duelists. And for the ranged duelists, I would say the priority is Vayne over Kayle. Make sure you play at least one of the ranged duelists as a carry though. I think Vayne 1 is much better carry than Kayle 2. However, if I'm already carrying Kayle 2 and hit a Vayne 1, I usually do not sell the Kayle immediately, as losing a 2-star loses quite a bit of board value. If you have Duelist +1, you can play an Ox Force over one of the duelists at level 4, typically Annie, although sometimes you'll play Alistar. At level 5, play the 4 Duelist Plord plus an Ox Force unit like right here. With Duelist Heart, you have the option of playing 6 Duelist on level 5 as well. At level 6, you can play either 6 Duelist or 4 Duelist plus an Ox Force. Here's an example of a board. If I have 4 Duelists plus an Ox Force, I'll typically just run 2 of Fiora or Nilah in that scenario. With Duelist +1, the board is just 6 Duelist plus Ox Force like here. While 6 Duelist is very strong, if you don't have Locket, you may opt to not run 6 Duelist at level 6, even if it's available, so your team doesn't just immediately fall apart. Instead, playing Ox Force and 4 Duelist like here. A couple other notes about this opener. You may opt to backline all 5 units if you're level 4 or 5 with a Locket to keep your Kayle and Vayne safe. At level 6, just lock at the 5 frontline units and put your carry in the back. If I'm carrying Vayne but running Kayle, I will typically just throw the Kayle in the frontline Locket at level 6 for full value, as I really don't care that much about her, and I'd rather her just get the Locket value in frontline. While I like Lockets and Redemption on Nilah, I typically prefer to put standard defensive items such as Dragon's Claw or Bramble on Fiora. If you made it to the end of the video and you enjoyed it, please make sure to subscribe, and if you have any video suggestions, please leave them in the comments and I'll get to them if I can.